In today's video, I just want to talk about how to install one of these crimp-on style BNC connectors onto some RG58 50 ohm coax. Now this could be to repair a damaged cable or to make up your own jumper cable of a custom length. The connector itself is made up of three components: the main connector body, the crimping ferrule that goes on the back, and the male center connector pin that goes in the center of the connector. And as with most jobs, it's helpful to have the right tools. In this case, the one that's really imperative is a good crimping tool that has the right diameter die for crimping the center pin as well as the crimping ferrule. Now the first task is to essentially prepare the end of the coax. Now there is a nice tool available that you can clamp on and spin around the coax that trims the outer jacket, the internal shield, and the center insulator to precise dimensions. I just don't happen to have one, and so I've always used just a razor knife or X-Acto knife, and if you do this carefully, that works just fine. The first step is to trim back just the outer insulator, and I typically go back about just about an inch, 20 to 25 millimeters or so, and just use kind of a rotating motion here to slice through, and just careful so that you don't nick into the shield too much. So once you've sliced all the way through, all the way around, you should be able to just slide that end off, and now you're left with the braid. Well, the next step is to trim back the shield, and it's typically going to be about 7 millimeters or a little over a quarter of an inch, and you could either do it by measuring or simply just use the connector as a guide, recognizing that the end of this ferrule is going to line up right about with the end of the black insulator, and you want the braid to end just before this shoulder. So you can just trim it just by using the connector as a guide. Now I'll typically fan the braid out like this, and then just carefully use a pair of diagonal cutters and trim all the way around. Well, that's not too bad. Now's a good time to slip the compression ferrule over the end of the coax and get it down out of your way here for the time being. Now the next thing we want to do is trim the center insulator. We want the end of that center insulator to bottom out against the insulator that's in the base of this connector, the white insulator up back there. And of course we can use the connector again as our guide if you don't want to do any precise measurements. Just take a piece of wire and stick it inside the connector here, and then where it bottoms out, bend it over at a sharp angle, and now you know the precise length to where you want to trim the center insulator. In this case it's in the neighborhood of about 11 to 12 millimeters, just under a half an inch. The next thing we want to do is trim the length of the center conductor, and we can use again the connector pieces as our guide. We stick the center conductor on here, we can see how much length I need to trim away so that when this thing is fully seated, the bottom of this hits the center insulator here. So it looks like I need to take about looks like about 3 millimeters off of there, or a little more than 1/8 of an inch. Let's see how close I got here. Looks like I get to take just another little bit more off of that. Okay, so it looks like we've got that length now right. So now we're all ready to do our two crimps. So this first crimp is on the center conductor, and it's always a little tricky sometimes to get everything lined up here. Feels like you need 3 hands, but I think we can get this thing lined up and give ourselves a good crimp here. There we go. And we'll just double check that that's good and tight and not coming off. And the next step is to insert the connector on. And we want to kind of make sure that the braid goes all around on the outside here. So we'll just push that on and push the braid up tight against the crimping ferrule. And then once we have got that in place, the connector is all pushed in as tight as it's going to go, we're bottoming out that center insulator against the inside of the connector. We can bring our crimping sleeve up and cover this up. And now we're ready to crimp that. Okay, so now this one's a little bit easier here. We stick this in the correct ferrule here. And I like to not quite bottom it out, but leave myself a little bit of a gap on both sides here. And then we'll crimp that down. And with that, we are done. This connector is on there good and tight. It's not going anywhere. And I've done this for many years. These connectors can serve you well for many years to come, and they're very easy to do. You can buy the materials, the connector, the ferrules, and everything as sets from many places, even on eBay and Amazon, and you can make yourself up your custom cable sets. Now, there is an optional step that we could have taken when installing this connector. Before doing the final crimp, we could have slipped on a piece of heat shrink tubing, and then after making the final assembly here, bring the heat shrink tubing up and shrink it across the ferrule and onto the coax. That makes for a really nice, neat, professional appearance, and it also serves as a little bit of a strain relief. But that's all there is to it to install these crimp-style BNC connectors on coax. The connectors will be specific to the type of coax being used, whether it's RG58 like this, or maybe 75 ohm RG59, or maybe the miniature RG174, whatever it might be. But you can pick up connectors that match the coax you're going to use, and then just ensure that you've got the proper die in your crimping tool to meet the diameters that are required for the crimps. But that's all there is to it. I hope you enjoyed this video, got a little something out of it. And if you like what you see on my channel, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up for this video here, and we'll look for you next time. Thanks again for watching, as always.